Welcome, everybody, to another installment of Judaism 201. We're going to talk about Shavuos today. Shavuos, why is this holiday different from all the other holidays? So I was mentioning to Shana yesterday my title, and she said, well, all the holidays are different from each other. I said, all right, that's a good point. But this one is more different than the other ones. So the question is why. So first, let's look at some of those differences. Welcome to the Rose and Blooms. Okay, I'm going to do a share screen here. Let's see. I guess as somebody would say, let's go to the sources. Here it is. And of course, the source is the Torah. So an interesting thing about the Torah, sorry, getting all set up here. We tend to think of the Torah in chapters or in parshas, but that's not how we originally got the Torah. In fact, the chapters and verses were invented by Christians so that they could discuss various verses and chapters with each other, and also so they can debate Jews about it. The Jews, apparently, the learned ones, knew the Torah so well, they didn't need chapters or verses. So the Christians invented them, and usually the chapter divisions make sense, but sometimes they don't, at least from a Jewish point of view. But that's a different discussion. The Torah also is not given to us in parshas, or at least the way we define a parsha. That's something that the rabbis invented, if that's the right word. When they divided up the Torah, the rabbis divided it up into 54 parshas. And actually, in Bavel, that's what they did. And in Israel, they divided up a different way. And it took them 3.5 years to get through the Torah. They would get through the Torah twice in 7 years. So parshas are also not the way God gave us the Torah. So how did God give us the Torah? Really, if you look in a text, there's only two natural divisions that we see. So one is between the books, right? Between Bereshis and Shmos, between Genesis and Exodus, there's a gap. And also, as you can see on the screen here, you can see, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call them paragraphs. And actually, the technical term is parsha, but I'm going to say paragraph because if I say parsha, it'll get confusing, and I'm going to want to talk about parshas once or twice anyway. So you don't have to read this text because it's way too small, obviously. But I just wanted to give you a picture of from last week's Parshas Emor. The Torah lists all the holidays a couple of times, most famously in Emor, last week's Parsha, and also in Parshas Pinchas. In Pinchas, the holidays are listed because it's in order to instruct us which korbanos, which sacrifices we should give for each holiday, and it's very detailed over there. Here in Parshas Emor, the listing of the holidays is telling us when the holidays are and what mitzvahs are associated with it. So what I did here, again, you don't have to read the Hebrew text because it's impossible to read anyway. Hopefully you can read a little bit, the little notes I made on the outside. So here we have a paragraph on Pesach. Here we have a paragraph on the counting of the Omer. Here we have a paragraph on the 50th day of the Omer, which actually is the longest paragraph here. Here's a little paragraph on Rosh Hashanah. And actually, one thing I didn't mention is there's actually two styles of paragraphs. There's the open kind, which are like major paragraphs, and there's the closed kind, which are little paragraphs. And the reason why I'm mentioning that here is interesting that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are sort of together in one big open paragraph, but they're marked off each one. And then Sukkos comes here. Sukkos is after that. And then I didn't finish the next page. There's another paragraph. I think it's a separate paragraph for Shemini Atzeres. And those are all holidays. This holiday passage is so well known that sometimes it's called, the Eila Moedim Parsha. And this Parsha is read on the first 2 days of Sukkot and also on the second day of Pesach, as well as the regular reading when it comes around on the guitar. And I know this Parsha well also because my son Yeshua, this is his bar mitzvah Parsha. In any event, what I want to focus on here is that there's no paragraph for Shavuos. There is a paragraph for the 50th day, but that's a weird way to call a holiday, just the 50th day. Granted, Shemini Atzeres is called the 8th day, but it too, there's a whole debate over whether that's even a separate holiday or not a separate holiday. And in any event, we talk about the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals. And here we don't have a paragraph for the third one. So let's just look at those other paragraphs. We don't have to look real carefully, but this is an example. So for the Pesach paragraph, it starts off, well, the whole introduction. These are the set times for Hashem, the sacred occasions, and then it jumps right into describing Pesach. In the first month, remember, biblically speaking, the first month of Nisan, on the 14th day, towards the end, you bring the Korban Pesach, and on the 15th, it's called Chag HaMatzos, and you should eat matzahs, we don't get such a thing when we get to the paragraph about the 50 days here. So let's read through that paragraph here. Again, I'm going to just skim really quickly. You should count for yourselves from the day after the Shabbos. That's a whole nother topic. The difference between us and the Tzedukim is that they take the word Shabbos here literally, and for us, it means rest day, meaning we count the Omer starting the day after Pesach. So glossing over that. So you should count for yourselves from the day after Pesach. You bring the Omer, 7 weeks, 7 complete weeks, 50 days. And then, almost as an aside, and also on that 50th day, you should bring 2 loaves of bread as an offering. And that's sort of strange that almost all the offerings are animals for all the holidays and every day and Shabbos. And here we're supposed to bring 2 loaves of chametz. They tell us how to make it. Let's see. And then, of course, the animals. You should also bring a goat and some lambs, And finally, at the end of the paragraph, almost as a add-on, on that same day, by the way, on that 50th day, you should also make it a holiday. And that's really all. Verse 21 is like the whole thing. It's like that's the only allusion to Shavuos in this parsha of holidays. So we see it's given short shrift. We see that there's no name for the holiday, and we see that there's no mitzvah associated with it other than the korbanos. And there's no date. And actually, the Gemara even has a substantial debate on whether the giving of the Torah occurred on the 6th of Sivan, which is the day that we celebrate Shavuos. Did it happen on the 6th of Sivan and on the 7th of Sivan? And there's a whole debate. And actually, the consensus seems to be that it happened on the 7th, which makes us even ask the question, well, why do we celebrate Shavuos on the 6th? So the discrepancy there is because right now our calendar is fixed. And back in those days, the calendar was not fixed. So a month could have 29 days or could have 30 days, depending on if they saw the moon or not. So really the debate there in the Gemara is, was the 50th day on the 6th of Sivan and 7th of Sivan? For us, that's a non-issue because the calendar is fixed, and the 50th day is the 6th of Sivan. So, but still, it's sort of strange to have one of the three major holidays doesn't even give the date. And as I mentioned, that there's no name. Now, there are names given to the holiday in the Mishnah and the Gemara. And names of holidays are very important. Names encapsulate both on a pashat, a simple level, but also on a deeper level, what the essence of that holiday is. So, for example, Rosh Hashanah, the simple meaning is that it's the head of the year. A deeper meaning, as part of my standard Rosh Hashanah shir, is that Hashem on Rosh Hashanah is examining what's in our minds. Do we plan to be on Hashem's team or not on Hashem's team? So the word Rosh in Rosh Hashanah actually has a deeper meaning. The same thing with Pesach. So you could say Pesach literally means to skip over. So you could say, yeah, it's called Pesach because Hashem skipped over the houses of Bnei Israel. But on a deeper level, it's talking about us skipping over or overcoming our own personal mitzrayims. So the name of a holiday is deep. So here there's no name at all. And in the names that the Gemara does, not the Torah, and the names that the Gemara does give to, I should say that there is a name. I think it's called Chag HaChatzir. It's the day of the reaping. But it's not mentioned in this parsha. And in the Gemara, they give it a slightly more important name. They call it Atzeres, and we're going to get to that very shortly, what that means. And we call it Shavuos, which just means weeks, right? Which is a weird name for a holiday. And we also see, so for example, in the Gemara, there's a whole tractate for Rosh Hashanah, there's a whole tractate for Shabbos, there's a whole tractate for Sukkos, a whole tractate for Yom Kippur. There's no tractate for Shavuos. I should mention, there is a tractate called Shavuos, but has nothing to do with the holiday, because Shavua also means an oath, and that whole tractate is about the laws of oaths. Okay, so I also wanted to mention that even in the Shulchan Aruch, let's see, this stuff is out of order. I think I have the Shulchan Aruch here. Here we go. So there's a whole section on Pesach. The Shulchan Aruch is divided to four main sections. The first section is called Orach Chaim, and that section is all about the common stuff of daily living, including the holidays. So saying the Shema and the brachas and what Shabbos and all the holidays are, that's what Orach Chaim is about. And there are about 5 or 6 major sections. There's a whole major section that's just called Hilchos Shabbos. There's another huge major section called Hilchos Pesach. And here's the first siman. Siman sort of means little, a mini section, chapter, an entry, I don't know. The first siman of Hilchos Pesach starts with this. We learn the halachas of Pesach starting 30 days before Pesach, so a whole run-up. And the Rama adds, and we buy wheat for the poor. And then the next siman, which I skipped, is about the Shabbos before Pesach. Is called Shabbos Hagadol, and what that's about. And then the next siman is talks about what to do on the 14th of Nisan, and it's very specific. It's a whole introduction. The 14th of Nisan, we do the search for the chametz. And then after about 65 simonim of the Shulchan Aruch, the very last one in the section of Hilchos Pesach starts off this. And on the 50th day of the count of the Omer is a holiday Shavuos. So, and then what the siman actually is about is what you're supposed to be davening. So again, there's no mitzvahs, there's no big sections, just this one siman. And also, I thought it was interesting that even though by the time the Shulchan Aruch was written, we've had 1,000 years of fixed calendar, and even the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say that it's on the 6th of Sivan. It just says on the 50th day of the count, which is interesting. I'm sure like those of us in, you know, in the Fairfax Chabad, right, we have a number of connections often to people from Australia. And there's always the whole big thing, like when somebody comes from Australia and they cross the international date line during the counting of the Omer, so they're counting 50 days and they lose a day. So, all right, so don't quote me. I forget if they lose a day or gain a day. The point is they're one day off. And either the day before we're celebrating Shavuos or the day after we're celebrating Shavuos, they need to daven the Shavuos davening while we're davening the regular davening, because it's the 50th day for them. And you know, that's the way the Lubavitch Rebbe ruled, and some other poskim rule that way. All right, so you've probably heard enough from me proving the answer to Shana's question that yes, every holiday is unique, but Shavuos is really different. So what are the takeaways? What do we learn from here? So I think the first one is sort of obvious once it's pointed out, and that is that Shavuos is the end of Pesach. It's really an integral part of Pesach. It's sort of like Pesach, when we had our Seders, is the beginning, and Shavuos is the end, and it's like the counting of the Omer is sort of like a Chol HaMoed, almost. So now the name Shavuos makes sense. It's called weeks. It's the end of the 7 weeks. And the other name, Atzeres, which is how the Mishnah refers to Shavuos, Atzeres means stop. It's when we stop our counting. And another indication that this is like really connected to Pesach. As we all know, I'm sure we know this one, right? Moshe never told Paro to let my people go without also adding, let my people go so that they can serve Hashem. It wasn't just getting out of Mitzrayim, it was getting out of Mitzrayim to receive the Torah. So in Pesach, we attempt to break free of our own personal Mitzrayims, our own narrow places, and we try to break free of those things that are holding us back, our constricted places, our own personal slaveries, which could be peer pressure or social pressure. And the Torah tells us that there's no freedom without the Torah. So a mini digression, I'm sure most of us know this, to just give the simple answer to what does it mean to say that you can't be free unless we have all these rules of Torah on us. So that can be a whole shiur itself, but I think probably most of us know the basics of that, which is that one, Torah provides us with tools for growth, to develop our midos, to set our worldview up correctly. I once had a discussion with somebody when my son Josh was very younger. They were amazed at the fact that back when he was very young, one of Josh's favorite foods is hot dogs. Baruch Hashem, that's not the case anymore. He prefers schnitzel, but he liked hot dogs. And somebody offered him ice cream afterwards for dessert, and he said, no thanks. And they were amazed that he could do that. And it violated kashrut, so it was like really easy for Josh to do that. And I think in a way the point is not that about mixing milk and meat. There may be deeper messages to that, but one of the points of that is just that it instills a discipline within him. My friend is like, wow, I have a 5-year-old, he could never do that. And I'm thinking, for Josh, it was easy. And I think, when a 5-year-old can face temptations like ice cream, and it's easy for him to turn it down, then when he gets older, when you're 20 or a teenager and you face much more severe temptations, it's easier to turn them down. And we instill a sense of discipline within us. And also, the Torah balances off other pressures of life. We talked before about, we all face peer pressure, and we all face social pressure. And the Torah helps balance off those pressures. You know, when Sean and I first moved into this house, we moved in on a Thursday, and on Friday we were unpacking, and then Friday night we stopped and we had Shabbos. And the next day, on Sunday, I was talking to my sister who didn't really understand anything about Shabbos, and I was telling her the story, and she said, you mean you didn't like even unpack your boxes or anything like that? I said, no, it's Shabbos. And she said, wow, what a great excuse. And I said, that's the point. All right, so again, to connect Shavuos to Pesach in that way, there's as the Gemara says, there's no freedom without Torah. The rules help give our lives structure and counterbalance the forces that we face with societal pressures to act in a different way than Hashem thinks is appropriate. The other important message, which is just slightly more subtle, it's still a little bit obvious once it's pointed out, is the Torah is telling us that this whole thing is a process. It's not just the end goal. It's not just 50 days after Pesach. It's the 50th day. In other words, this whole counting of the Omer is supposed to be a process for us. There's a witty comment that I was surprised to learn. I think the Chavetz Chaim actually said this. This process is symbolized by the counting of the Omer every single day. And the Chavetz Chaim, I think it was him, said, we don't just count every day, but we have to make every day count. I know that seems like a trite expression, but there's really a lot of meaning in that. We all have, to belabor the obvious, we all have a limited number of days here on this planet. So in that sense, we're kind of equal. Today is 24 hours for each of us that we can either waste away or be productive at. And I think I think this process is also symbolized by the Omer in the following way, as probably most of us know. On Pesach, chametz is a sign of arrogance and of self-puffery. Chametz puffs up, and that's why we're so strict with chametz, because it is said that self-importance. Some other people say money is the root of all evil. Other people, I think, a larger issue is that self-importance, thinking you're important, thinking being arrogant is the root of, if not all, a whole lot of evil. So we want to wipe that out in our personalities on Pesach. And then during the counting of the Omer is a barley offering. And barley, at least in those days, was pretty much strictly just animal food. And the idea is that barley could be made into chametz, but it's unrefined and it's for animals. And in a sense, if we're building back up our own personalities, so in chafetz we're devoid of all ego, ideally, and then from no ego at all, we get to having sort of like an animal ego. And what I mean by that is the first step is I guess can throw around Maslow's hierarchy, right? And the first step, I don't mean animalistic as an insult, but the first step of existence is taking care of our basic needs. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to procreate, we need sunshine, we need exercise, we need those physical things in order to exist. But along with those physical things come physical desires and I'm not just talking about, sexual immorality, but other desires that, cause us problems. So the idea is that the Omer symbolizes the refinement of this animal process. And then after 50 days, after working on ourselves, we come to Shavuos, where we're not only saying the chametz is okay, but the korban, the sacrifice, is actually chametz itself, because we do need to have a little bit of an ego. We need to stand up for what is right, or when we get into a position where, the peer pressure says, or societal pressure says, you should do X, Y, and Z. And we need to be strong enough and confident enough in ourselves to say, no, X, Y, and Z is not appropriate. I'm not going to get sucked into that. So with the aid of Torah, the idea is that we control our desires and channel energy into positive things. Now, but it's not the end goal itself. And that's sort of the slightly more subtle point here, in that it's a process. And I want to share with you, this is also an interpretation by the Chavetz Chaim. I love this example. When we finish a tractate of Gemara, there's a whole, I'm sure you've seen it. There's like 2 pages worth of prayers that the person says. And a lot of the prayer is modeled after this particular person. I forgot who it was, but whenever he came out of the Beis Midrash, when he was done studying, he said this whole long prayer. And this prayer is part of what we say today. It says, I give thanks before you, Hashem, that you put my lot among those who sit in the Beis Midrash, and you give my portion and not made me a person who just sits idly in a street corner. And then there's this curious quote here. I toil or work and they toil. I toil and receive a reward. They toil and do not receive a reward. So what does that mean? Right? I mean, Jews and non-Jews both work and they both get paid. So what's he talking about? And the Chavetz Chaim gave a great example. He said, you know what? When you're in the business world, you don't get paid for working. You get paid for product. You get paid for the end result. When you pay somebody to make you a shadel, make you a pair of shoes, if they do 90% of it, you're not going to pay them for it. You're not going to get paid until they're done and you can get the product. But what he's saying here is that when you're studying Torah, when you're and I would expand that to the message of, when we're working on ourselves, we're trying to improve ourselves, which is symbolized by this whole process of Pesach to counting the Omer to Shavuos. When we're working on ourselves with Torah values, again, which should be 365 days a year, it's the effort that counts. It's the toiling and doing that counts. There is no end result. You can't know all of Torah anyway. You can't know all of anything anyway. You can't finish the Torah. You can read the whole Torah. You can read the whole Gemara, and you can do it every year for the rest of your life. And you still just know a part of it, right? So it's the effort, it's the process. So I think those are the 2 main messages, I think, of what the Torah is saying here by putting Pesach as, by putting Shavuos just as like a little add-on to the end of the counting of the Omer, where it's the Omer that gets the big paragraph, and Shavuos almost seems to be an afterthought. Now, I just want to add one other thought. I'm going to violate two rules of public speaking. One of them is that you're not supposed to apologize. So I'm going to apologize for breaking a rule. And the second rule, I'll even tell you what rule I'm breaking, is that they say that when you give a shiur, you should leave with one main message. And my message was that Shavuos is connected to Pesach and it's all a process. That's the message. But since Shavuos is such a big holiday, I can't resist adding a second message. So here goes. I just want to add one other big picture item that I just happened to run into last night, and I thought it was so good I wanted to share this one also. In our prayers, in the Yalav Yavo, we say, Zaman Matan Toraseno. It's the time of our giving of the Torah. But as we just read in chapter 23, there is no mention of any historical event ever happening on Shavuos. Nowhere in the Torah can we find that the Torah was giving on Shavuos. There's not even a hint, really. I mean, unless you look with Gematria or this or that, I don't know. But there's no hint that the Torah happened on Shavuos. The fact that Torah was given to us on Shavuos is not contested. There's nobody debates that in the Gemara. As I mentioned earlier, the only debate is whether it happened on the 6th, 7th, or the 6th of Sivan or the 7th of Sivan. But nobody debates that it happened 50 days after coming out of Mitzrayim. But the Torah doesn't tell us. So there must be a message in that. And this piece I read last night, I thought was a really beautiful piece, and it encapsulates some nice poetry. There's this dramatic story of Eliyahu Hanavi, where he has this famous bake-off, so to speak, with the prophets of Baal, where the prophets of Baal were also Bnei Israel, were also Israelites, and they were saying that this new god called Baal is the main god, not Eliyahu Hanavi, your Jewish god is old-fashioned, get with the times. So he says, all right, fine, and they have this whole bake-off, right? They all put out their sacrifice pans or whatever it is, and Hashem accepts Eliyahu's pan, and for all the other people, they all died. So Queen Jezebel, the queen, part of the king and queen, I think the king was Achav, the Queen Jezebel, who's sort of in charge of Israel at the time, says, fine, you won today, but we're going to kill you tomorrow. And Eliyahu is very depressed about this. Like, didn't anybody even get the message? So it takes him 40 days and 40 nights, a tip off there. And he goes to Mount Chorev, another tip off. Mount Chorev is another name for Mount Sinai. And Hashem says, what are you doing here? So Eliyahu says, I am zealous for Hashem. The people are abandoning you and they killed your prophets. In other words, to make a dramatic story much shorter, he's asking Hashem to do something about this, essentially to punish the people. So then there's that famous scene. Here we go. I did quote it. Here we go. So he went into a cave and he spent the night, and Hashem, here we go. What are you doing here? I'm zealous for Hashem. The people have broken your covenant. I mean, they're at Mount Sinai. This is a big hint. You gave us we made a covenant with you at Sinai, and we're breaking it. So Hashem says, come out of the cave and stand on the mountain. And this is that famous poetic part. And Hashem passed by. There's a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains, shattering rocks. It says, but Hashem was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, and Hashem wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was fire, and Hashem was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was, now this is hard to translate, kol damama daka. Some people say the still small voice, although the word small is not in there, but it sort of means that, or a soft murmuring sound. Hashem is in this soft, still sound. What does that mean? I think it's a little bit hard for us to understand, but Eliyahu Hanavi was I didn't quote the rest of this. So after all that, Hashem says, okay, so what are you doing here? And Eliyahu gives the same answer. I'm zealous for Hashem, da 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 da. The subtext being you ought to do something about it. So Eliyahu didn't get the message, and it might be hard for us, but he's a prophet and we're not, so he should have gotten it. So what are the commentaries saying about that? I think it's they were at Mount Sinai, and Hashem made the same pyrotechnic, fire, thunder, the big sounds that happened at Sinai. So in one sense, Hashem seems to be acknowledging the critique of Eliyahu Hanavi, that yes, you all made a covenant with me at this place with these sounds. But I think what some of the commentaries say, Hashem is saying, but don't expect to find me in the supernatural events like that anymore. That was a special and unique event. People have to find me in the soft, still sound. So now we can understand that Eliyahu Hanavi doesn't get it. After all, Hashem just did perform a miracle with him with the bake-off, right? But we should get this, and I think so. One reason given why Hashem doesn't do his magic tricks like that for us anymore, and I mean that with the best respect, is that takes away our freedom of choice, right? That's the Gemara describes, I'm sure we've all heard, right, that Hashem held a mountain over us and said, please accept the Torah. So a lot of the commentaries say, no, it wasn't literally a mountain. What it was is that the presence of Hashem was so overwhelming. How could you say no? It was like the equivalent of a mountain hanging over you, right? If Hashem actually showed his or her face to you and asked you to do something, are you going to say no when you actually know it's Hashem? Of course not. So Hashem hides his face a bit and gives us freedom of choice. And that's what Hashem was telling Eliyahu Hanavi. You know, the days of Sinai are over. We have to find God in other places. So perhaps by Torah, by not mentioning a historical event or even any mitzvahs, all right, let me make a tangent on that. Maybe we'll do the tangent in a second. It's hinting to us that it's not the event in the past so much as it is this ongoing process that we just talked about, right, of learning Torah and to refine ourselves, make ourselves into better people, which is exactly why the reason that the Ramban says why we have all these mitzvahs to begin with is to make us better people. That's the point of this whole thing. So in modern times, so I might say that, so why don't we have any mitzvahs on Shavuos? You might say that Torah is too big to be, and this message is too big to be confined to one mitzvah. Once you associate certain mitzvahs with it, it constricts the whole idea of what Shavuos and what this whole process, what the whole Torah is about. So we say, no, there's not one mitzvah. You're supposed to be involved in this world, and all the mitzvahs count. So I think, in modern times, in today's life with the internet, and the world is dominated by science and technology. Does Hashem really expect us to relate to the thunder and pyrotechnics of Sinai? I'll be the first to admit I have a hard time wrapping my mind around what exactly happened at Sinai. How did it happen? How could it possibly have happened? How could it possibly have not happened? It's hard to wrap one's mind about it. But I think the message of this Eliyahu Hanavi's story is that that's okay. That I think Hashem really just wants us to rise to the challenge of hearing the revelation of Torah as it's reflected in our studies and in our natural world, the trees, these cockamamie 17-year cicadas. I mean, how does that happen by evolution? I don't know. The Hashem is in all these things. The smile and laughter of a toddler. It's just, maybe that's where we're supposed to see Hashem, and maybe that's part of the message of not saying that, of being so vague about when Torah was given, because maybe it's being given to us all the time. And I think this message is, we're supposed to hear Hashem in this soft, still voice. This soft, still voice that Hashem told Eliyahu Hanavi is where he should be hearing Hashem. So I wish all of you a great Shavuos, which is in a week and a half. It's a week from Sunday night. Let me stop the share here. And I wish you a great Shavuos. I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to try to let people unmute themselves in case there are any questions. All right, stop the recording.